Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 17 of the Wargiven Racing Podcast. Today, we will be talking Formula One and the season preview for it as testing, or I should say, the final testing session for F1's new 2022 cars is this week in Bahrain at the Sakir International Circuit. So, let's get right into it. So, looking at a quick season preview, this is the 73rd season of the F1 World Championship, starting all the way back in 1950. The Constructors' Championship started a little bit later, I believe in the late 60s. I don't have an exact date for that here. But anywho, the defending Drivers' Champion, even if it was taken in slightly controversial fashion, Max Verstappen won his first title in an epic battle with seven-time world champion Lewis Hamilton, in probably what will be remembered as one of, if not the best, title fights in the history of the sport. Definitely of the modern era across the whole season. The defending Constructors champion is Mercedes. They won their 8th title overall and their 8th title in a row. No one has managed to pull that crown from Mercedes in, I guess, what is now called the turbo, or has been called the turbo hybrid era, which started in 2014. Although technically you could consider 2017 through 2021 a separate era, as there was aerodynamic changes, and then from 2022 to I believe 2025 is going to be this new aerodynamic change with the same engine. So depending on what you consider the turbo hybrid era, it could be over, it could not be over. But anywho, of that era with this engine package, they have won every constructor championship. And so that's been the past 8. There are 23 races on this year's calendar. At the moment, there's only 22, of which the reason for that we will get into in a few moments. The Q2 tire rule has been removed. So for those who do not know, the Q2 tire rule was in F1 qualifying, which is a 3-session qualification session in which in Q1, the fastest 15 drivers are taken, the slowest 5 are dropped, and start where they finished respectively. So 16th in that session starts 16th in the Grand Prix. Of course, pending any penalties or equipment changes, whatever. But 16th would start 16th. Then the final 15 go for the final 10 shootout in Q2. And in previous years, with this qualifying format, if you made it into Q3, you had to start the race on the tire compound and set that you set your fastest Q2 lap on. So if that was the medium tire compound for the weekend, and that was your fastest lap in Q2, you made it to Q3, you started the race on that medium tire, and then proceeded to do Q3, separate. Q3 was just for pole and setting the final positions. This year, that rule is gone. So if you get through to Q3 on a medium set of tires, I don't know why you do that, because you can start the race on medium tires now from pole, which, I'm glad to see. I kind of like all the teams being able to have freedom of choice. I'm a little worried about it with the whole 1-stop versus 2-stop or 3-stop strategies, as F1 doesn't have refueling. So they're not limited by their fuel tank. They're limited by how hard they push their tires, which is a debate for another time. This is the first season of Red Bull Powertrains, so we technically have a 4th team that is fully in-house as a factory team. For the past 3 seasons, Red Bull has been using Honda Powertrains, which they still are using, but they're being helped by Honda, and they're I guess they have to be producing the engines themselves with Honda's technical support. It's in my opinion, it's very confusing why Honda left the sport, but they're kind of still in the sport under Red Bull Powertrains. I don't know. All I know is it's Red Bull Powertrains, the official constructor is Red Bull Racing. So it's no longer Red Bull Racing Honda. It's just Red Bull Racing. So I'm counting them as a constructor like Mercedes or Ferrari, where the engine and the team are in-house. And yes, I know Alpine is technically Alpine Renault, but Alpine and Renault are the same company. Alpine's just a different brand, so I'm considering that all one of the same. So, and then the biggest news going into this season is the first season of the new aerodynamic regulations, of which have changed the design of the car significantly. Previously, in 2017, the cars were wide body, high downforce, absolute machines. Bullets went on a qualifying lap. Very detailed wing work and barge board work and body work, and a lot of different elements that was used to, get the best aerodynamic, movement. Those barge boards and those additional elements that would stick off the car are banned now. So to compensate for that, F1 has brought back ground effect, which is the use of, I believe it's Venturi tunnels under the car, on the floor of the car, in order to create a lot of downforce instead of going over the car, going under the car, that keeps it stuck to the ground. And in addition with this, bringing back this ground effect, which has been banned since 1983, when it was first introduced, and Lotus used it to great effect to win the 1979 Drivers' and Constructors' Championship. Pirelli has changed their tires from being 13 inches to 18 inches. So bigger tire. We'll see how that affects. 18 inches is also the NASCAR tire, the new NASCAR tire, which if you follow NASCAR, just a quick tangent, they've had issues a little bit with that tire. So we'll see if some of the issues that NASCAR and Goodyear have had with the new car, the new tire, transitions into F1 with the new car, new tire, which is going to be interesting. And this is a typo because I'm an idiot. Lap times are expected to increase. They are supposed to get bigger. I don't know why I just didn't say that. They're projecting about 4 to 5 seconds before testing. Data from Spain in the pre-test, so the shakedown test, I guess, showed that it was slower, but, teams in that aren't really pushing. So we're going to use this upcoming test in Bahrain to really see, how much faster was last year, or how much or should I say, how much slower is this year to last year. So taking a look at the calendar, as I mentioned, testing resumes in Bahrain right after this video, or hopefully right after you finish this video, March 10th. It runs through Saturday, March 12th. It is at the Bahrain International Circuit at Sakir, where the first race is held as well next weekend. Race weekend being the 18th through the 20th. The major reshuffles on the schedule is the Jeddah circuit, the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix, gets moved from being the penultimate round to the second round of the season. So let's see if that makes it a little bit less chaotic, although I very much doubt that, because it's now the second race of the season. There's the return of Albert Park, Montreal, Singapore, and Suzuka to the calendars after their COVID-related cancellations. Of course, pending the global situation, but right now it's looking good in all those countries for the races to be held. I'm really looking forward to all these races, as it will actually be my first time watching an Australian Grand Prix, the Canadian Grand Prix, a Singapore Grand Prix, and a Japanese Grand Prix live, as I have not done so before. And then finally, with the major shuffles, is Miami debuts for their first of, I believe, 10 years on the F1 calendar, and the street circuit around the Hard Rock Stadium in Miami. So really looking forward to seeing that second American race back on the calendar as an American myself. The 3 sprint races are at Imola for the 4th round of the season, Austria for the 11th round of the season, and Brazil the 21st round of the season. The sprint differs. The sprint weekends differ from normal weekends in that qualifying is moved from Saturday morning or afternoon, depending on where you are, to Friday. And then the sprint is a 100-kilometer race, so 1/3 of the Grand Prix, to set the grid for the start of the race. So it's like that test race. And then with the drivers, no longer the Q2 rule. That's kind of following on from sprint weekends from last season where that obviously didn't apply. There's a new point structure. Last year, the sprint races gave out 3, 2, and 1 points, respectively, to first, second, and third. Now it is, I believe, one of the older points formats in which it gives points from first to eighth, which would be, I think, 10, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. That sounds right in my head. Probably isn't right. No, that would be 10. It's, I believe, the old points format. So now it awards the top 8 with points compared to just the top 3, which I like. I like that there's more points. I like that it's not, full Grand Prix points. Obviously, I'm happy that it's like that middle ground from being 33% of the total Grand Prix points. But enough drivers get it that it's worth pushing for. So I'm happy about that. And then one final thing for the stat nerds, the pole stat is now being awarded for the Friday single lap fastest car and driver, compared to last year, of which it was set by the winner of the sprint race, which caused a lot of negative feedback. And I agree, pole position is starting the race. Well, it's a sprint. Yeah, I like that pole is now being awarded on Fridays once again. So with the wrapping up the calendar, we head into my predictions. This is a preview and predictions. I forgot to mention the predictions part. And, of course, I've got to give my opinions on the Drivers' and Teams Championship, or the Constructors' Championship, as I should say. So taking a look at the Drivers' Championship first, we have to start in the back with Guan Yu Zhou bringing up the field. The news that just came out over the past day that Kevin Magnussen is replacing Nikita Mazepin in the second Haas seat for obvious reasons after Wargiven, Mazepin's father's company, was pulled and had their sponsorship terminated by Haas due to the ongoing global situation that I'm not going to get into. My only stance on this is I don't think Nikita Mazepin deserved a seat in F1. But, pay drivers are a thing in F1. And every motorsport, there's pay drivers in NASCAR, there's pay drivers in IndyCar. Sports car racing is all pretty much pay drivers outside the factory teams. So it's part of motorsports, but, with other talents, it kind of sucked to see him there. But at the same time, he won some races in F2, which is impressive. I couldn't do that. And so obviously the reason why he was at Haas was because of that sponsorship money, mostly. And with that gone, it made sense that he lost the seat. I do feel bad for him on that note, that he did nothing to get him dropped, if that makes sense. In just my personal opinion, I don't think he should be on the grid. But at the same time, pay driver, he was there. He was my original 20th pick. And then Guan Yu was 19th, but sadly, because Mazepin not so sadly, because Mazepin got replaced, Guan Yu drops to 20th. I don't think he's going to be bad. He may score points. If I had to pick a driver to not score points, it would be him and him alone, because I think everyone will score points, bar probably him this season. In his first year in F1 at Alfa Romeo. So going to 19th, I have Mick Schumacher, and this is deceiving. I don't think Mick Schumacher is the second worst driver on the grid. I think he's going to show what he's shown throughout his junior career, which was his first season, he gets adapted. His second season, he does a lot better and pushes for, being competitive. And I think, we'll see next year him really start to hit his stride. But being in the Haas and that car most likely being the slowest on the grid, closer to the grid, or to the rest of the field, but still the slowest, I don't see him picking up more than a few points in lucky situations. Maybe a wet race, maybe early on in the season while mechanical issues are still getting figured out. So I sadly see him finishing 19th. I think it'll be interesting to see his battle with the 18th place driver in Kevin Magnussen, who just got announced to come back to F1 after a year out, returning to Haas. The whole story about Magnussen in 2020 getting dropped was due to Mazepin's funding helping the team out as they struggled with financial issues with the whole pandemic and everything. And I think Magnussen was definitely by the fact that he's able to race, and then of course Grosjean had his accident, which probably just ended his F1 career in general. Magnussen of the two was the one to bring back. He's typically the safer driver in terms of not wrecking. I mean, he has his moments, as everyone does, but anywho, I think it's going to be interesting to see Magnussen versus Schumacher in that battle there within the team. I think Magnussen will definitely edge the race finishes, but I honestly think that Schumacher could definitely give Kevin a good run in qualifying, and it may go Mick's way, but I'm not getting that specific. But I actually think Magnussen will get enough points to beat Schumacher, obviously, and I think Magnussen will score the team's first points in Monaco with a very impressive performance, because that's a driver's circuit. You can hold off, you can defend easier if you pull off the right strategy, which I think he can. I think that's where he's going to get his points. But I think that the points he accrues is going to be probably there, maybe two other races like he did in 2020. So I have him 18th. Going on to 17th, I have Nicholas Latifi, another spot that in my mind where the Williams will be pace-wise might seem a bit harsh. At least to me, it seems a bit harsh, as I do think he's going to improve. I mean, he went up against George Russell, who is now a Mercedes driver, nearly won on his Mercedes debut when he had to fill in for Lewis Hamilton in 2020. Massive pace, qualified second in last year's Williams, which was obviously the best car he'd been in to that point, but still a Williams, probably the 9th fastest car in the grid. And it was a wet qualifying session, but second place. Latifi doesn't have that talent. He's talented, obviously. He's an F1, and he's won junior races, and he's got funding. So, again, it helps that he's got that. I think this is the season where it's make or break for him. He's got to have a good, solid season, and that's what I thought last year was. I thought last year was an average season. He kept out of trouble. He got the big points when he could, and, he did his best, and I thought that paid out pretty well for him. But I think that, he's going to lose out in his battle, obviously, to Albin. And I think Williams will keep him on, as I don't think Albin will be with the team long term. Having that money helps, even though they don't need it as much now that they got taken over by Dorothy Capital. But I still think Latifi will do enough this year, and I think the 17th is harsh because of that. But moving on to 16th, I have Yuki Tsunoda, another, in my opinion, harsh ranking. I think Tsunoda, who struggled heavily last year, and I think, if it wasn't for Mick Schumacher crashing a few times in that mid to end season, I probably would have said Schumacher was the best rookie last year, despite being in the slowest equipment. I see Yuki having a better year, definitely a more consistent year where, he doesn't crash as much. He focuses on his driving. His driving gets better. His wheel-to-wheel racecraft gets better. I just don't see the AlphaTauri car being on the same level as last year's car. Last year's car, the AlphaTauri, at some races was third best. At most races, I'd say it was fifth best. And he disappointed. And again, I think he's going to get better, but I think his car and where it relatively will be worse than last year. So I have him 16th. Moving on to 15th, Valtteri Bottas. Valtteri got tons of stick at Mercedes for not being able to compete with one of the best drivers of all time in motorsport. And most certainly in F1 and open wheel motorsport. or in road course racing, road street course racing. I don't know if he could do it on ovals, but that's not a debate for today with Lewis Hamilton. Anywho, Valtteri Bottas, new team, Alfa Romeo. I think he can lead them. I think he'll definitely help out Guan Yu Zhou in his rookie campaign, and I think he'll drag the most. I think, much like Kevin Magnussen, when there's points on the board for the team, he will take it. And I think he'll have enough of those because of his one-lap pace. You know, he beat Lewis Hamilton 4 or 5 times last year, 6 times, and Lewis Hamilton has the most poles of all time. And sure, Valtteri's racecraft, you know, in the Mercedes wasn't great, but then again, that Mercedes car is probably not designed to be in the race. It's designed to check out and, you know, take off. And maybe it has to fight one car, and if it's passing, it's on, you know, new tires because he just came out of the pits. And, you know, a lot of that didn't happen, you know, for one reason or the other, whatever. And the pressure, you know, it built on him. This 15th place, to me, is fair. It's not fair on his driver ability. I think he's a top 10 driver on the grid. But I don't think, you know, the car's going to be there. Alfa Romeo has had disappointing years, especially last year where they were the 8th fastest car, sometimes the 7th fastest car, and Kimi and Gio just didn't get the job done, or team strategy didn't get the job done. I mean, I think of Mexico where the team was in 9th, or Gio was in 9th running well, and then the pit stops happened and he finished like 15th. Which is, to me, is unacceptable, but I'll get more onto that with the constructors. Valtteri Bottas, though, a good season with his first year at Alfa Romeo, 15th. Moving on to Alex Albon, I think he's going to maximize the car. I think he's shown the pace. He's shown that he's a good talent. I just don't think the Williams will be there for him to go higher up. So I see a very good season for him in his return to F1. Lance Stroll, again, with the argument about, you know, Latifi and Joe. Obviously, Lance's dad owns Aston Martin, and that's why he's primarily there, most will say. I think he's deserved that seat. I think Lance will be better this year. I think the car will be better. I just think the quality of the grid around him will prevent him from being up there. You saw it last year. He was more consistent than Vettel throughout the season. Scored more points finishes than Vettel, but Vettel had the bigger points when he did finish, and that's not even counting his disqualification in Hungary, in which he had a podium. He had 2nd place, which would have been a lot more points for Vettel. So I see Stroll getting beat by his teammate, but I see him having a good season. Not a shocker where he finishes behind a Williams or Alfa Romeo in the championship, but I see him being that lowest of that mid-pack of drivers. Next, we go to Esteban Ocon. It's, again, I think it's just the strength of the field. I think the Alpine will be the 5th best-ish car. And obviously when I'm talking, you know, best car, where I think the cars are going to be, that's different than Constructors' Championship, because that factors in, to me, car and driver. I think he'll be good. I think he'll be close to Alonso again. But I think Alonso's experience and just raw talent that the 2-time champion has will lead him to beat his teammate again. Again, I think this battle, and you'll see it here, I believe it's from 8th to, 13th, is I think it's all going to be within 15, 20 points. So I see this being close-knit throughout the season. And moving on to the last driver outside the top 10, Pierre Gasly. Again, I rate him as a top 10 driver in F1 at the moment. But that car, in my opinion, is just not going to be there to do what it did last year. And I know he finished in the top 10 last year at Constructors, but that was with a car that was 3rd, 4th, 5th best consistently throughout the season, and his team didn't help him. Or he made mistakes, like in Bahrain. He was 4th, hits the back of Danny Ricciardo's, or 5th, hits the back of Danny Ricciardo's car, loses his wing, has to retire after being a lap or 2 laps down, you know, at the end of the race. And, you know, just wasted opportunities. You know, he had the podium in Baku, 3rd place finish, you know, was there when it mattered. But I just, with the car, I don't see him. I see him outperforming his car. That's why he's 11th and his teammate's 16th, even though I think his teammate's going to have a good year. And I think Pierre really needs to move on. after this year. I don't know where he's gonna go, because to me the main option of Alpine is closed. Maybe he goes to McLaren. I could see that. I think that'd be a good move. I don't think he can go to Ferrari now that Sainz had the season he had last year. Aston Martin, I don't see them unless Vettel has a shocker, which I don't think he will. They're not dropping him, and they're not going to drop Stroll. Alfa Romeo has Teo Pourchaire and Zhou at the team, plus Bottas. Zhou and Pourchaire are fighting for that second seat. He's stuck. I think McLaren, honestly, might be his only, unless he goes to Williams. He could replace Alex Albon at Williams. They do a swap. To me, he's got to go to McLaren. He's got to go to Williams next year. And if he doesn't, he's just going to be a wasted talent. And that's sad. That's just really sad, because I think Pierre is a top 10 driver for sure. Now we go on to 10th, Sebastian Vettel. Again, I think their cars could be better than the AlphaTauris. And I think, his experience, his pedigree, now being with the team for the start of his second full year there, he's integrated. I think he's going to start the season off a lot better than he did last year. And so that's where he's definitely going to beat Stroll throughout the season. Then we go 9th, which is what I'd say the first shock. Maybe Yuki Tsunoda being 16th is a shocking one. But for me, Daniel Ricciardo. Ricardo showed flashes last year. But I think he is peaked in F1. I know that's harsh, because everyone loves Daniel, my bad. I love him too. I love the vibe, as a NASCAR fan, seeing him drive Dale Sr.'s car around COTA, the Wrangler car, after getting his podium win. Well, his win, which, counts as a podium, so he won his bet with Zach Brown. Seeing that was fantastic, and I'd be thrilled for the guy to prove me wrong and finish higher up. I think where the car is going to be, I think it's going to be, in the upper mid-pack, but not up in front. I don't see him having the season that he needs to get that confidence back. And I think McLaren's going to move on from him at the end of the year. With whoever they replace him with, I don't know. My guess would be Pierre Gasly. That's who I would use. But it's just, it's sad, because he's got a lot of talent. He's a lovable guy. Everyone loves him. But I just think, he's peaked. And there's nothing wrong with that. I think, for me, if he's peaked and gets no seat in F1 next year, come run NASCAR. You've obviously he's talked with Dale Jr. before. Dale Jr. runs an Xfinity team. Dale Jr.'s got a part-time 5th car. Sign him up. To me, that's what I would love to see. But anywho, we're going to move on to 8th. Fernando Alonso. He showed glimpses, obviously, Qatar, Hungary, of what he still can do. And I think Alpine, despite their shakedown problems in Barcelona, I think they're going to be better, more consistent, closer to the top of the mid-pack. And so I see Fernando having a fantastic year. Maybe a win. He sneaks a win. I think he'll get a few podiums. In fact, I think drivers 1 through 15 will have podiums. So I think, it's going to be a crazy year. I think Fernando Alonso will surprise many and be what I'm considered, well, I guess next is best of the rest. The next 2 spots are best of the rest. Well, he's definitely up there for best of the rest. Next, I have Sergio Perez. Again, like Danny Ricciardo, I think Perez has peaked. I think he's a perfect teammate for Max Verstappen and Red Bull, how they operate. I think he's a fantastic driver, can pull out those fantastic drives. I see him winning a race this year. Being there, being consistent. You don't see him getting involved in wrecks. You don't see him making dumb mistakes. But at the same time, I think other drivers are faster than him. And with where I predict Red Bull to be with their car, 7th is his spot in the Drivers' Championship for me. Next, I have Lando Norris in what now I'm calling the best of the rest spot, 6th place. And I think this is more of a fact that I just don't think the McLaren team are there yet. They're not a factory team. They get customer Mercedes engines, which are obviously the same ones as the factory team, but obviously the factory knows more, has more data. And obviously I don't know how much they share technically with Mercedes. I know it's less than Williams per se, who's got almost junior team status like how AlphaTauri has with Red Bull, but excuse me. I just think Lando's going to have a wonderful season. He's going to win. I'm going to predict he's going to win multiple races because he has shown that he can put the car there. Now he's got to finish, and I think he will finish. I think he'll learn from Russia from last year and get a few of those race wins. But I have him in 6th. Now moving on to the top 5, I have George Russell. Slightly controversial here. As I rate Russell, you don't do what he did in a Williams without being a phenomenal talent. You don't win F2 without being a phenomenal talent. You don't win. I think he won F3. I'm not too sure if he won F3. But anywho, I think George Russell will be probably next year's champion. I think this year, though, he's going to have a massive wake-up call. He's going to have to get consistent with his racecraft. We saw last year he can qualify a Williams in the top 10. And he did it repeatedly. He did it in Britain in a dry session. Obviously, that didn't matter because there was a sprint, but he did it in a dry session. George Russell's, and I fear that he might become like Valtteri Bottas. He's got the pace, he's got the single lap pace, but he doesn't have the racecraft to hold on. Obviously, in Sakir in 2020, he should have won that race. He had tire problems. That's racing. At Imola last year, you saw that sometimes his awareness in the car isn't there. And that may be his emotional maturity. That may be his talent. We don't know because he's still young. So I think George Russell will be very good. I think he's going to win races. I think he's going to score a lot of podiums. But I also think he's going to have crashes. And maybe they're not in qualifying, but I think they're going to be in the race where they cause him to lose the spots in the Drivers' Championship. So I have him finishing 5th. In 4th, I have Carlos Sainz. I think he's the new Mr. Consistency over Sergio Perez. I mean, last year he had, 1 podium? 2? 2, because he had 1 in the final race. Or 3. Did he have 3? Yeah, he had 3. He had Monaco, Hungary after Vettel got DQ'd, and Abu Dhabi. So he had 3 podiums. His teammate only had 1, but generally finished, 4th or 5th, which is more points, obviously. But Sainz was the more consistent driver. He had, maybe less mechanical luck. He got the podium at Monaco when his teammate, got pole and then crashed and then couldn't start the race. So, Carlos Sainz, I think he's going to have, and I think the Ferrari's going to be better. I don't think Sainz has the outright pace to, win the championship. I think he'll hang in there. I think it's going to be close halfway through the season. But I think he's just going to, be there. He's going to finish 4th, 5th, 6th every race. And that he doesn't have, like, a mechanical problem in. Or maybe he gets collected in someone else's mess. I think his consistency is going to put him above Russell, even if I think Russell is a quicker driver and on pure talent. I think Sainz's racecraft will help him out where it will hurt Russell relatively, if that makes sense. But moving on to the top 3, I've got Max Verstappen, and this is not a reflection on Verstappen. I'd argue that Verstappen is equal with Hamilton on talent. I think it's because of Red Bull's focus last year on last year's car. And obviously we don't know the full details, but Red Bull put a lot of effort into making sure that car, stayed the fastest car so that Max could be so dominant in a lot of the races. And it worked. He won the championship. No matter how you feel about that ending, he won the championship. Mission accomplished. Red Bull had their driver win. Red Bull didn't win the Constructors, though. And part of that is Sergio Perez, but Valtteri Bottas had a bad year. He had a slightly better year than Perez, obviously, because they got the Constructors Championship. But Max Verstappen can't carry the car I think Red Bull's going to have this year to a Drivers' Championship. I wouldn't be surprised if he goes into that sprint race in Brazil with a chance to win the championship. I think it could be completely different. But I think, he will be eliminated in Mexico or the USA is when he's going to just run out of time to get that championship. And I think, he's going to have another fantastic year. Last year he was practically faultless. Maybe I'd say his only, I got to think. I think other than Jeddah, which to me, that was the biggest farce of the season. And that includes the finale, which to me also was a huge, those actually, I'm going to equal those. The finale in last year's Saudi Arabia Grand Prix they were both farces. The Belgian Grand Prix, farce, but not to me as damaging. Because that actually there was legit, and in Saudi Arabia there's safety issues with what happened. But again, different time, different discussion. I'm getting off track here. But other than, I think, Italy, he probably should have backed off a bit, played the patient game, and he's still got to learn a bit there. And then his dive bombs in France and Imola and whatnot, where he made some really reckless, in my opinion, moves on Hamilton. Other than those, he drove flawless. And I think every race bar his retirements in Baku, obviously Singapore, Italy, and Hungary, which he had half of a car, I think he finished on the podium. I'm pretty sure he finished on the podium everywhere else. I don't think the car's going to be there for that. But again, I don't know. Is he the best driver on the grid? I think he's tied. But I think Verstappen's going to drag that Red Bull into third place, and he's going to do so in terms of the championship, kicking and screaming until he mathematically cannot win. And then we've got our final two. Lewis Hamilton, in my opinion, will win his 8th World Championship, taking the record from Michael Schumacher, and he will ironically beat Charles Leclerc, who is obviously in the Ferrari. And this is mainly put down to, even if Mercedes isn't the fastest car, Lewis Hamilton, when he has been beaten in a close championship battle, 2007, 2016, last year, all 3 championships that went down to the final race, and he lost. And then the next year, he dominates and wins the championship. I mean, okay, I didn't watch F1 in 2008. Obviously, he didn't dominate the season there. But, him and Massa were definitely the best 2 drivers. And I think his McLaren was not as fast as the Ferrari that year. You could see that with the teammates. Now, obviously, again, debate for a different time. But Lewis Hamilton, I don't think he's going to take, that attitude of that he's washed. I think he's going to use what happened last year, and he's going to not demolish the field. I shouldn't say demolish the field, but we're going to know that, he's in charge. He's in charge of the championship, and sure, he may not win every race, but he'll be finishing second unless it's a mechanical failure. Or he'll be finishing third, or he'll be finishing fourth. He's not going to lose this year. I don't think he's going to let himself lose this year. And who knows, that could lead to mistakes. I mean, we saw him last year, who he had to face significant pressure for the first time from a non-teammate. And, the inter-teammate battle, he has more confidence when he's beating his teammate consistently, which he did to Bottas. I think we're going to see a new Lewis Hamilton like what happened in 2017, where he had that battle and he had that fight with Max, and it was a dogfight. It was vicious. It was dirty. It was a street brawl. And he's going to use that. He's going to win this year. He's got to adapt to the regulations, adapt to the new car. He's going to win the championship. And again, 2017, there was a regulation change, and it was aerodynamics. And Mercedes, I still think, will have the best engine. Ferrari will be close, but I think Mercedes will have the best engine. And Lewis Hamilton on the warpath will win his 8th. Now, just to talk about Leclerc, kind of gets overshadowed being second place, gets revealed with the first place driver. He's going to have a great year. I'm predicting him to win at least 5 races. I think that Ferrari package is there for him to do so. And I think he's got the talent. Sure, he's inconsistent to an extent, but to me, he's got the racecraft, more or less. Sure, he's had some questionable moments. 2019 Italian Grand Prix being one of them, where he pushed Lewis off in controversial fashion. But, he's shown that he's not afraid to fight wheel to wheel. And, sometimes that leads to his detriment. And, that probably will. I think Leclerc and Verstappen's going to tangle a few times, which is ultimately why Lewis is going to win. Leclerc Verstappen may win, 12 races this year? So over half. I could see Verstappen taking 7 wins. But I could see Verstappen crashing out a few times and Leclerc getting involved in some things a few times. And Lewis is just going to win because he's got the overall package. Between him, the team, the car, motivation, I think Lewis is the best pick. I think that any of the top 5 could win the championship. They all could. I think it's going to be I think Russell will be in it until the summer break, realistically. I think Sainz will be in it till we go out to Japan. I think Verstappen is going to drop out in the third to fourth last the third or fourth last race. I think it's going to go down to Brazil. I think we're going to see a Brazil moment where Leclerc's either going to catch up to Hamilton, keep it close if he was already winning the championship, or Lewis is going to win it there. And I think it's more on Leclerc to prove that he can fight for a championship than Hamilton. I think that's going to be the deciding factor there. So that wraps up the drivers, which it was probably long that we talked about. And now we're going to go Constructors. Constructors is going to go a lot quicker. There's only 10 of them. And I kind of more or less hinted at where I think the teams will be. So I think all the teams are going to score points this year, unlike last year, where that Haas was so bad, it wasn't even sniffing points. And that included races like Baku, where, I think Mazepin finished 13th. And I never felt he was close to the points. So, last, Haas Ferrari. Better season. Need to build upon it. But, it doesn't, this isn't going to be a Braun GP where, tanking. Obviously, Braun didn't tank the previous year, but they kind of got rushed to set up. That's kind of the... Anywho, I don't think Haas has the personnel, the facilities, any of that. And then this Mazepin controversy. Sure, they have Magnuson back, which I think will bring them closer to 9th place. I now have them closer to 9th place than I did previously, but I don't think they will be. And then, so that leads into 9th, which is Alfa Romeo. I think they're going to have the 9th fastest car, but it's going to be close with Williams. It's going to be obviously ahead of the Haas. But I feel that Bottas will pull that team. I'm like I said in the drivers, Zhou may be the only driver not to score a point this year, but I think Bottas is going to do well enough that he will outscore both Haas drivers combined. So I have them 9th. 8th, I have Williams. I think they're going to be battling for 8th fastest car with Alfa Romeo, but I think Latifi has shown that when he's put in situations where he can score points, he can. He doesn't go out of his way to create those situations where he scores points. He takes advantage when he has it. He's dependable, so I see him picking up, maybe he picks up an 8th place or a 9th place a few times throughout the season. That's just enough with Albin having a good return. And a better car than Bottas to, hold him off for the most part. And he scores enough points to put Williams over Alfa Romeo. Then I have Scuderia AlphaTauri, who's using that Red Bull Powertrain. Kind of fun having Red Bull on the engine side of the Constructors here. And, again, I think their car is going to be worse than last year relative to the field. I think they're going to be 7th. I think that both drivers will have good seasons. I just don't think the car will be there at a consistent enough rate. I don't think Yuki's reached the point of development where he will be fast enough to beat the Strolls and the Ocons and the Vettels and his teammate consistent enough to outperform. And I don't think Gasly will be able to go that far out of the ceiling of the car and where it's been. I see 7th, 8th, and 9th having cars much closer to each other this year than they did last year. Moving on to 6th, I have Aston Martin recovering after what could almost be described as a disastrous first season as Aston Martin. Their hype, and that's mainly due to the hype they had. They talked big. They finished 4th in 2020 with the controversial car design. I think they're going to get back to their roots. Sure, they have a new team principal after losing Ottmeier. I'm not even going to try to pronounce his last name. But after losing him, that's a hit, but I don't think it's going to hurt them that badly. I think their car is going to be fighting with the McLarens and the Alpines. And I think Vettel will have a better second season, but not good enough to push it above 5th place. Alpine, again, I think Fernando Alonso will beat a McLaren driver. I have him beating Daniel Ricciardo. I think Alonso may get a win. I think he'll get multiple podiums. I think Ocon will get podiums occasionally, run top 5. I just don't see them, progressing their car that far, though, from where it was last year. And I'd say last year they were the 6th fastest. And then they were battling with Aston Martin a few times for that 6th, 7th fastest. But this year I see them being 5th, 6th fastest. And I think Fernando Alonso and Ocon are a better pair than Vettel and Stroll. Even if the Renault engine is not as good as the Mercedes, I think the Alpine will be slightly better due to their driver lineup. 4th, McLaren. As you can probably tell from how my drivers' championship is, with Lando 6th and Danny Rick 9th. They're going to be in no man's land. I think they're going to pick up a few wins and several podiums throughout the season. I apologize for the hiccups if they are audible. I think they're going to do well, but I think they're going to be in no man's land where they're not as fast as the top 3 and they're not as slow as the 5th, 6th battle. So I have them finishing 4th. A good season, building on to compete next year. Which, there's that danger of, we'll wait till next year. But I honestly think next year there'll be a race-winning car in some form. Obviously, we'll see as the season progresses. As last year, all the teams, this bottom 6, 7 could completely change because of mid-season upgrades. The same with the top 3. Completely changed with mid-season upgrades. We didn't see that last year, and I haven't ever seen it because my only 2 full seasons of F1 watching is, 2020, which was delayed due to a pandemic, and no one spent any money, really, upgrading their cars. And then 2021 wasn't a massive change from the 2020 car, plus everyone was focusing on this year's car, so they didn't really bring packages after, the 5th race. So, I think McLaren could jump up mid-season with some updates, but other teams are making updates. I just think they're going to be 4th, but separate from the bottom 6 teams. Now on to 3rd, Red Bull Racing, as you probably heard me talking about with, in the drivers, how Max is going to drag that car to 3rd place in the driver's standings. It's going to be comfortably 3rd. It's going to be some days the 2nd or the best car. I think on street courses, Red Bull is still the team to beat. Because of how they run their aero department with Adrian Newey. I don't think they'll beat the 2 top teams, which are Ferrari and Mercedes. I think they're going to be competitive, but again, I think Sergio Perez's consistency and pure pace is lower than the pure pace and overperformance of Lando Norris. And then George Russell's competing with Perez, and Sainz is there. And so with that, with Perez finishing 7th, I don't see Red Bull going any higher, and Max finishing 3rd. I don't see him going higher than 3rd. And then I have Ferrari winning the Constructors' Championship, and that is because of Carlos Sainz. As I mentioned, I think Hamilton's going to win the championship. I think it's going to be the final 2 races where it's decided, but I have Hamilton winning the championship. So at worst, he wins by 40 points. 30 points, I think, is the max he'll win at. 30 points over Leclerc. I think Sainz can beat Russell by that much. Or honestly, I think Leclerc will be closer to Hamilton than that, and I think Sainz will do enough to get them the Constructors' Championship. Again, if I had to pick pure talent, I'd go the Mercedes lineup. because I think George Russell's a better driver than Carlos Sainz, and Lewis Hamilton is better than Charles Leclerc. But I think if Leclerc can get his consistency that he needs to compete for a championship, his pace is close enough to Hamilton's that in a slightly better car will allow him to compete for the Drivers' Championship. And Sainz's consistency and, again, a slightly faster car and his wreck avoidance and his lack of mistakes that we've seen, through... I didn't see really any mistakes from him personally in 2020 and 2021. He shocked everybody last year at Ferrari. I mean, if you would have picked a driver to finish highest of all the new drivers with new team, or the drivers at a new team, you would have probably picked Daniel Ricciardo. But Carlos Sainz massively outperformed him. Way outperformed Vettel at Aston Martin. That may be due to Aston's terrible car, but nevertheless, 4-time champion. And then Alpine, Fernando Alonso, he dueled with him a lot, but, he ultimately got past Alonso in Hungary. Now, granted, again, strategy. Can't really compare the two, but I think Sainz will do enough for Ferrari to win. And Mercedes, their key to winning this Constructors' Championship is how quickly does George Russell adapt to being in a top team, racing for wins and podiums every week instead of, once in a very, very blue moon. And then, obviously, there's Lewis Hamilton. Lewis Hamilton could win all 23 races. Do I think that's going to happen? No. But he could. He's got, obviously, the talent, and I think the cars could be close enough to the Ferrari that will happen. That could happen. Or not would happen. Could happen. But, obviously, due to, mechanical failures and, track suitability, I don't think that's going to happen. If that happens, you just have to sit back and be like, wow. Honestly, if he went 22 or 23 for 22 or 23, best driver all time, there's no doubt. But, I just don't think Mercedes could pull it off. I think their string of turbo hybrid dominance constructors in a row is going to be done. And I think Ferrari's going to win for the first time since 2008 a trophy, which it's like the New York Yankees in baseball. In the MLB, which I follow heavily. They haven't won a World Series since 2009. And because, I'm a much more biased baseball fan, because I have a team that I, vicariously support, I enjoy the Yankees not winning a World Series. But, boy, in F1, as a motorsports fan, would I love to see Ferrari make a comeback and beat Mercedes, who has almost turned themselves into a Ferrari in F1 with a lot less history in terms of their dominance. But, anywho, Ferrari win. Haas bring up the rear again. Alfa Romeo 9th, Williams 8th, AlphaTauri 7th, Aston Martin 6th, Alpine 5th, McLaren 4th, Red Bull in 3rd, Mercedes in 2nd. That's how I project the 2022 Constructors. And one final thing for today, the testing that will be going on Thursday, March 10th. To Saturday, March 12th, for 3 days. It will be broadcast on F1 TV if you have subscribed for it. If you have not, F1.com will have live timing and a lot of analysis, a lot of different stories looking at the cars. The testing sessions start at 10 a.m. local time, which is 2 a.m. here on the eastern seaboard of the United States, which is just past when I would fall asleep, so I'm a bit sad about that. Who knows? I may stay up to watch it. But they will run for 8 hours each of those 3 days, starting at 10 a.m. local, ending at 19 p.m. local or 11 a.m. EST. There will be a break halfway through, so that's why there's 9 hours, but only 8 hours of running. The major storylines, in my opinion, Sakir hosts the first race of the season. So obviously, compared to Barcelona, this will be much more representative of what we'll probably see next week in the first Grand Prix weekend. But, that all depends on how they address the second storyline, which was the major thing coming out of Barcelona, the porpoising, which is the bottom of that car bouncing up and down on that surface because of the new ground effect air. And, F1 teams, I think Toto Wolff and some other principals have been, we need this fixed. We need F1 needs to provide us a fix. My opinion to that, Hell no. They spend millions of dollars on these damn things. Apologies for the language. Fix it yourselves. If you have to go slower, that's your fault. If you couldn't predict this happening, which, it's kind of funny that most of the teams had this problem. You couldn't predict it in your testing. That's why we test. You fix it. You bring upgrades. You don't have F1 handhold you. And I really hope F1 doesn't say, hey, you have to run this for all the teams. Because if teams can go lower than that because they figured this out better, that's what F1's about. Of all the motorsports, F1 is the most about the technical development within the rulebook. So, teams, figure it out. Use this 24 hours of running to figure it out. Okay, rant over. And then, obviously, the final thing is true pace versus sandbagging. Happens every year in testing. We saw it to an extent last year. Mercedes was bad. They had a very bad test. I believe they completed the least amount of laps. And everyone was like, oh, Red Bull's going to run away with it. But at the same time, they were like, oh, well, Mercedes is going to win. We'll see. If a Williams is fastest, that's because, in my opinion, 4 to 5 other teams are not running their full package. So obviously, it's going to be interesting to see what the pace, and we'll find that out really quickly. I mean, Sakir is a pretty standard F1 circuit. I mean, it's designed by Tilke, which is a normal design on the F1 calendar these days. It's got the straights, it's got the corners, it's got, the medium speed, it's got the low speed. It's probably a better testing location than Barcelona, although Barcelona is a lot of medium speed, which teams like to have down pat. But especially with the first race, you'll know what the pace is at the car at most tracks is going to be. So that's when we'll find out. To me, I say the fastest team in testing tomorrow and this weekend won't win the first race. That driver won't win the first race. I'm praying that I don't jinx them, but that's just, or I guess would be a jinx. But anywho, that's my third storyline from testing. I will most likely have a testing recap included at the end of the racing recap for this upcoming weekend. And yeah, that's it. That's the Formula One season preview and predictions. F1 is back. Drive to Survive comes out on Friday. I believe. Is that the 11th? Yeah. Again, Drive to Survive, dramatic interpretation of what happened last year. Don't take it super seriously. Don't fundamentalize it, but enjoy it. Enjoy the drama. It's done with 2021. Fantastic season. Probably the best season I'll ever watch in my lifetime for various different biased reasons and all that. We saw a great of the sport and probably the next great of the sport duke it out for 22 races. And, we could see that again this year. We could see a 3-way battle this year. We'll find out. That's what testing's about. That's what the first race weekend's about. And, we'll just have to see. So, on that, wrapping up, if you like today's content, like, subscribe, comment with your predictions down in the comment section. Feel free to check out the other content on this channel. We cover IndyCar. We cover NASCAR. We cover Formula E. We cover IMSA. And WEC is coming next week with their first race as well. So it's going to be a busy next week on the channel. I look forward to seeing, any of your opinions in the comments across this next week. And I really appreciate the support you guys have all been giving to the channel. Like I said, like, subscribe, comment down below, and enjoy the racing.